Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're wading into what is arguably the noisiest conversation on the planet right now. You literally can't open a browser tab or, walk into a coffee shop without hearing about artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah, it's basically the background radiation of modern life at this
It
point.
really is. And the prevailing narrative you always hear is usually one of two things, right? It's either this magic wand that's going to solve world hunger and, I don't know, write all our screenplays,
It's not
or
a Skynet waiting to happen.
exactly, Skynet. But we're actually going to bypass all that noise today. We're taking a stack of papers from the world of materials science, specifically looking at the work of Professor H.K.D.H. Badeshia, to see what happens when you stop treating AI as, like, magic and start treating it as engineering.
Which is really where the rubber meets the road, or I guess more accurately, where the alloy meets the turbine blade. Because in material science, you can't just hallucinate a result. If a language model writes a bad poem, it's annoying. But if a model predicts the wrong tensile strength for a steel beam,
A bridge collapses.
exactly, a bridge collapses. The stakes are infinitely higher.
And the mission for this deep dive, for you listening at home, is to unpack a really provocative argument from these sources. And that argument is that neural networks, when you strip away all the hype, are not digital brains. They aren't conscious. They are simply a very sophisticated, nonlinear method of regression analysis.
Right, it's quantitative design. It is just math. And frankly, I find that far more interesting than the whole magic narrative because it's actually actionable.
Definitely. But before we get into the actual mechanics of the neural nets, we need to set the stage with the problem that they're trying to solve. Because I've always assumed, that material science is firmly rooted in physics. If we want to design a new steel, don't we have fundamental equations like dislocation theory or thermodynamics that tell us exactly what will happen?
Well, we do, and those theories are beautiful. I mean, dislocation theory gives us this profound understanding of why a metal deforms under stress. It explains the core mechanism. But there is a massive gap between explaining why something happens and predicting exactly when it will happen in a real complex alloy.
Because the real world is messier than a textbook diagram.
Infinitely messier. Industrial alloys, they aren't just pure iron. They're this crazy soup of 20 different elements. You've got manganese, silicon, carbon, molybdenums, and they're all interacting with each other. Plus, you have the processing history, the cooling rates, the heat treatments. The sources actually reference a critique of the theory of everything here.
Oh, right. The idea that even if you have the fundamental equations of the universe, they don't help you build a bridge.
Right. Even with perfect physics equations, you cannot solve them to predict the yield strength of a specific batch of steel. It's just too computationally heavy.
It's kind of like the difference between knowing the rules of chess and being able to predict the exact outcome of a game played by like a million people simultaneously.
That is a great analogy. The physics equations just become computationally intractable. You can't solve them for that many variables. So traditionally, metallurgists have used empirical methods. Yeah. We do experiments, we plot the data points on a graph, and we try to draw a line through them.
Good old linear regression.
Yeah, theoretical linear regression works great if the relationship is simple. If you add carbon to iron, the strength goes up. That's a nice straight line. But in these complex alloys, the variables interact with each other.
Right, and this brings us to what the notes call the bad dream equation. I love this concept. So if you add carbon, strength goes up. But if you also add manganese, it changes how the carbon behaves. So now you need a mathematical term for carbon, a term for manganese, and a totally new term for carbon times manganese.
And you can see how that spirals out of control immediately. If you have just a dozen elements, the number of potential interactions, carbon with silicon, silicon with molybdenum, all three together, it creates an equation so long and unwieldy that it's practically useless. You end up trying to force this rigid mathematical structure onto a natural phenomenon that is inherently fluid and complex.
So this is where the neural network enters the picture, not as a synthetic brain, but as a solution to that bad dream equation. Instead of humans trying to write down the perfect formula, we just let the network find the shape of the data on its own.
Correct. And the key to this isn't some black magic. It's a very specific mathematical function. The sources highlight the importance of the hyperbolic tangent, or the tan function.
I vaguely remember tan from calculus back in the day. It's a sigmoid function, right? It produces that kind of S-shaped curve that goes from -1 to +1.
It does, yeah. Think of it as a flexible activation switch. It's nonlinear by nature. Now, one single tan function is just a simple curve. But the real breakthrough of a neural network is that you can stack them. You can take 3, 10, or 50 of these hyperbolic tangents, these hidden units, and combine them.
And by weighting them differently.
Exactly. By adjusting the coefficients, or weights, you combine those simple S-curves to form a complex, multidimensional surface that can match any relationship in nature, no matter how weird or nonlinear.
So instead of a rigid straight line that you're forcing through the data, you have this flexible mathematical blanket that can twist and turn to navigate through all those complex data points.
That's a perfect way to visualize it. It creates a generic, nonlinear function that maps your inputs, like chemical composition and temperature, to your outputs, like strength or toughness. And it does this without you ever needing to tell it how the elements interact. It learns those interactions purely by minimizing the error between its prediction and the training data.
Which sounds totally perfect. But flexibility usually comes with a cost, right? If the model is too flexible, if it can twist into literally any shape, can it just cheat?
Yes, you've hit on the single biggest danger in machine learning, which is overfitting.
And the sources use this fantastic analogy for this. Homeopathic coffee.
It's such a brilliant way to visualize the problem. Imagine you have a data set with a clear underlying trend, but like all real-world data, it has noise, little experimental errors, a dirty sample, a miscalibrated machine. A perfect model finds the trend and ignores that noise.
But an overfitted model.
It's like the homeopathic coffee. You keep diluting the solution, adding more and more parameters, more and more complexity to the neural network until you aren't modeling the coffee anymore. You're modeling a water. You are literally modeling the noise. The curve twists so wildly that it hits every single experimental data point perfectly, even the wrong ones.
So you end up with a model that has zero error on the data you gave it. But if you ask it to predict a brand new alloy, it fails spectacularly because it's memorized the static on the radio rather than the actual song.
Precisely. It has zero generalization capability. So the way material scientists fight this is through really rigorous discipline. You never give the model all your data at once. You always hold back a testing set. You train the model on one pile of data, and then you say, okay, predict the results for these experiments you've never seen before.
And if it fails the test, you know you've brewed homeopathic coffee.
Exactly. You throw it out and try a less complex model.
That seems like a really solid check. But the Pedestre papers go a step further than that. They argue that just getting a correct number out of the machine isn't enough. The real innovation here isn't the prediction itself, it's the uncertainty.
Yes. This is the part that I think is the most misunderstood about AI and science today. We naturally tend to trust computers. If the screen says the steel strength is 750 megapascals, we just believe it. But a standard neural network is confident, even when it is completely clueless.
Because it's just drawing a line through the void.
Right.
Yeah.
Imagine a graph where you have a bunch of data on the far left and a bunch of data on the far right. But there's a huge gap in the middle, a data desert where nobody has ever done an experiment. A standard neural network will interpolate a single line straight through that desert. It gives you a specific number, but it's a complete guess.
And this is where the Bayesian neural network comes in.
Yes, the Bayesian framework completely transforms the neural network from a best guess machine into a probability machine. Instead of calculating one single set of weights, one perfect curve, it actually calculates a whole distribution of possible curves.
So in that data desert, where there's no experimental information to anchor the model,
The models fan out. One curve goes way high, one goes low, another stays flat. They all perfectly fit the existing data on the edges, but in the middle gap, they disagree wildly.
so when you ask the Bayesian network for a prediction in that gap, it doesn't just confidently say 750. It says, well, it could be 750, but honestly, the error bar is plus or minus 400.
It quantifies its own ignorance. And for a research scientist, that massive error bar is the most valuable thing on the screen. It acts like a spotlight. It tells you, go do a physical experiment right here. It actively drives the research strategy by identifying exactly where human knowledge is missing.
That is a huge pivot from the whole AI replacing scientists narrative to AI directing scientists.
It's a force multiplier, and we have concrete proof that this works. The source material outlines several distinct success stories where this Bayesian approach didn't just match human experts, it actually corrected them.
Let's look at the grain size story first. This one really highlights the danger of human bias in science.
Yeah, this was a study on the activation energy for grain growth in steel used for nuclear pressure vessels. Basically, how much heat energy do you need to make the crystal grains inside the metal get bigger over time? The metallurgists had this semi-empirical equation they've been using for years. and they had calculated an activation energy of about 900 kilojoules per mole.
I'm guessing that number didn't exactly sit right with the physicists.
It is physically nonsensical. The energy required for an iron atom to just move through the crystal lattice, which is called self-diffusion, is only about 210 kilojoules per mole. A value of 900 implies this massive energy barrier that simply shouldn't exist in reality. But the humans stuck with it because their traditional equation was linear, and they forced their experimental data to fit that linear expectation.
So they finally fed the raw data into the neural network instead.
And the network, which has zero preconceived notions about what the number should be, found that the relationship was actually highly nonlinear. When they mathematically extracted the activation energy from the trained model, it came out to roughly 190 kilojoules per mole.
Which aligns perfectly with the fundamental physics of iron.
Exactly. The machine stripped away the human bias and revealed the physical truth that the experts had obscured with their rigid bad dream equations.
That is a massive win for the machine. But my absolute favorite example in these papers is Project 750. This feels like a classic engineering impossible triangle problem.
It really was. The goal was to build a new type of power plant that operates at 750 degrees Celsius. Thermodynamics tells us that higher temperatures mean higher efficiency and significantly less CO2 emissions. But 750 degrees is absolutely brutal on materials.
Usually you'd use nickel superalloys for something like that, right? Like what they use inside a jet engine.
You would. But those alloys are incredibly expensive. The notes actually mention that the turbine blades in a jet engine can cost as much as their weight in solid silver. You cannot build a massive terrestrial power plant infrastructure out of semi-precious metal. It is just not economically viable.
So the prompt they gave to the neural network was essentially, make me a material that acts like an expensive superalloy but costs like scrap metal.
Pretty much. And it had to be strong. It had to be creep resistant, meaning it won't slowly stretch out of shape over time under heat. And it had to be weldable. The researchers set up a fitness function that heavily penalized cost while rewarding performance. And then the neural network scanned the vast combinatorial space of all potential element compositions.
And it spit out a recipe.
It proposed a very specific mix of scrap-quality iron, nickel, and a few other elements. The humans made the alloy, tested in the lab, and it met every single rigorous criterion. And they named it FT750DC.
And the DC stands for?
Dirt cheap.
That is fantastic. I love that. It optimized for a variable cost that fundamental physics equations do not care about at all, but engineers absolutely live and die by.
It found a viable solution in a weird corner of the data space that humans simply hadn't looked in because we categorize things so rigidly. We think iron is for cheap stuff, nickel is for high-performance stuff. But the model saw a unique blend that gave 80% of the performance for 10% of the cost.
There's one more success story that I think we definitely have to cover because it shows the model finding something properly new. The manganese-nickel interaction in welds.
This is a phenomenal example of the black box actually illuminating a new physical mechanism.
Yeah.
In welding, the conventional wisdom, the rule of thumb that literally every engineer knew was that adding nickel improves toughness.
Right.
It prevents the weld from shattering like glass when it gets cold.
So the standard thought is more nickel equals a better, tougher weld.
Usually, yes. But the neural network, while analyzing a massive global database of welds, predicted that if the manganese content is already very high, adding nickel would suddenly make the toughness plummet.
It totally contradicted the established rule of thumb.
The human researchers were highly skeptical. But trusting the massive error bars and the model's overall confidence, they went and did the physical experiment. They made the specific weld. And the machine was right. The toughness dropped like a stone.
Why, though? What did the machine see in the data that the human experts had completely missed?
When they took that specific weld and looked at its microstructure under an electron microscope, they found a phase they hadn't expected to see in that mix. It's called coalesced bainite. It's a very coarse, brittle crystal structure that only forms when the growth gets accelerated in a highly specific way.
So the unique interaction between high manganese and nickel triggered this brittle coalesced bainite phase.
Yes, and humans missed it because we tend to think of chemical elements acting independently. We think nickel does X and manganese does Y. The neural network saw the complex nonlinear interaction, nickel plus manganese equals Z. It obviously didn't know the human name coalesced bainite, but it knew the mathematical signature of brittle behavior lay exactly in that region of the data.
And that circles us back to the big philosophical question about intelligence. The machine didn't, quote-unquote, understand metallurgy, but it accurately predicted a highly complex metallurgical phenomenon. Does that actually count as intelligence?
The source material offers a very pragmatic definition here, taken from an interview with the professor. It suggests two baseline requirements for true intelligence. First, episodic memory. That is, the ability to retain information about the past.
Which would be the training data.
Right. And second, the ability to plan for the future, meaning using that stored memory to accurately predict outcomes in novel scenarios you haven't faced yet.
Which is exactly what the model did with the dirt-cheap alloy and the weld toughness anomaly.
By that strict definition, these networks possess a form of intelligence. But the expert in the text is very quick to draw a hard line between intelligence and consciousness. There's actually a pretty funny anecdote in there about an immigration officer.
Oh, I caught that. The professor is at the border and tells the officer, I work on neural networks. It's like how the human brain works.
And the officer just deadpans and replies, I wish my boss had a neural network.
It's a great joke, but it really underscores the core point here. These are tools. They are highly complex regression machines. They do not have intent or consciousness.
And that lack of intent brings us to the crucial ethical side of this research. Because these tools are so incredibly powerful, how we choose to use them and share them matters deeply. There is a very strong critique in these papers regarding the black box problem in academic publishing.
This is the issue where researchers publish a paper saying, hey, we used an AI to solve this massive problem, but then they don't share the underlying code.
It's actually worse than just not sharing the code. They publish a paper saying our neural network predicted this material property with 99% accuracy, but they refuse to publish the actual weights and biases of the network. A trained neural network is entirely defined by those weights, that giant matrix of numbers. If you don't publish them, the model is effectively dead to the world.
No one else can use it. No one can verify if it's actually right.
Exactly. It fails the most basic tenet of the scientific method, reproducibility. If I cannot take your mathematical model and test it against my own independent laboratory data, then your paper is just a marketing advertisement. It is not a contribution to human knowledge. The sources argue passionately that if you are funded by public money or if you claim to be doing actual science, you must disseminate the full functional model.
It seems like a particularly dangerous problem in a field like material science. I mean, if someone publishes a black box model for a new bridge steel and engineers start using those results to build things without being able to audit the underlying math.
That is quite literally a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
We need total transparency. We need to be able to poke the model, find its weak spots, and see exactly where those error bars blow up into the data desert. Science thrives on harsh criticism and independent verification. Proprietary hidden AI models completely stifle that process.
So, to try and wrap all this up for you listening, we have gone from the absolute hype of AI magic to the gritty reality of nonlinear regression. We've seen how simple tan functions can stack up to create these flexible, multidimensional surfaces to solve the bad dream equations of fundamental physics. And we've seen how Bayesian networks allow us to navigate the unknown by actually quantifying our own uncertainty.
And ultimately, we've seen that this specific technology, when it's used with extreme discipline and scientific transparency, is discovering materials and physical interactions that human intuition simply couldn't find on its own. It is not replacing the scientist, it is expanding the scientist's vision into much higher dimensions.
I want to leave you with one final, slightly unsettling thought that occurred to me while reading through all these papers. We keep reassuring ourselves by saying, it's just math, it's just weights and biases, it's just an algorithm optimizing for a result.
Which is demonstrably true.
Yeah. But isn't that what we are? If we eventually map the human brain down to the absolute last synapse and neurotransmitter, aren't we just going to find a massive, squishy biological regression machine that's simply optimizing for survival?
Man, that is the ultimate question, isn't it? If you peel back all the layers of human consciousness, do you eventually find a ghost in the machine, or just a really, really complex set of weights and biases?
I don't think we have the training data to answer that one quite yet.
The error bars on that question are definitely infinite.
Fair enough. To everyone listening, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep looking for the signal in the noise and always check the error bars.
See you next time.